So how we'll work today is that when we get through to the more interactive parts of the training workshop, if you'd like to make a comment, you can either send a chat message or put your hand up to speak. And at least we know that both of those systems work for everyone, which is really great. So the reason we're holding this workshop today is to tell you about the purpose of our competition, why we hold it annually, to talk about the strategies for planning and delivering a poster presentation, which includes considering the audiences that you'll be meeting when you're doing your presentation, to consider how to present your research both on the poster and orally, and also to spend quite a lot of time thinking about the graphic design issues to help you produce the best poster possible. And you'll have the opportunity this afternoon to work individually with Peter on your ideas for your poster to date. So the reason why we hold this competition is for two reasons, mainly to publicise the postgraduate research that's going on within the university. Because although the people in your own departments and faculties will be very familiar with the work that you're doing, it's amazing how little our work gets spread out across the wider university, and people are very surprised sometimes to find out the richness and the breadth of the work that's carried out here. And the second reason is because we want to give you an opportunity to engage with the public. We don't get very much opportunities here because we don't have undergraduate students, and a lot of our postgraduate students are working further afield. And so we want to give you an opportunity to engage with other academics, but also with the much broader population of people who work here at the university. And they really welcome it. At the end of the poster session last year, I was queuing up in the hub to collect a cup of coffee, and I had some of the materials from the day. And the lady standing behind me asked if I'd been involved in it, and I said yes. And she said, oh, I thought it was really interesting. She was one of the secretaries on campus, and she'd been attracted by the buzz and the noise around the Hub Lecture Theatre, and popped her head in to see what was going on, not knowing that we had a competition. And she'd wandered around, talked to students, looked at different posters, and thought it was absolutely wonderful, and was on her way back to her department to tell everybody what a really enjoyable experience she'd had and encourage people to come next year. So you never quite know who you're going to attract. Now that's thinking about somebody who's casually here from the university. But we've also had, we have the mayor come each year, and in the last 2 years the two different mayors have actually been really interested in our students' work and have actually supported them, given them some funding, which we think is really exciting. So you don't know what opportunities might open as you enter this competition. And the other thing is that you have the opportunity to invite up to 3 guests. You need to let the research school with Verina Scott know really quickly who you would like to invite if you haven't already done so. But it's your opportunity to invite either, if you're getting towards finishing your project, you might want to invite somebody who you'd like to do a postdoc with. There might be somebody influential in your field that you'd like to have an opportunity to talk to. So do think about, if you haven't already done so, who the guests you would like to invite, and bring them along, because it's an opportunity for you to engage with them in an easier way than possibly sending an email or going to a conference and trying to seek out the people that you're interested in networking with. We have a series of prizes for entering the competition. We have overall competition winners, and the marks are 50% on the poster and 50% on your presentation. We also have a peer review prize, which is the poster that's most highly rated by you on the day. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. Also, you've already submitted an abstract with your competition entry, but you have the opportunity to update your abstract. The deadline is 5 o'clock on Thursday, the May the 14th. So you have time to update it, to hone it, and you have an opportunity to submit that towards a prize, because we think it's really important that you hone the skills of producing abstracts in addition to practicing the poster and the presentation. Because if you want to present at a conference, nearly always the entry requirements are to produce an abstract that will then be peer reviewed. So this gives you a little bit of experience of doing that as well. And then the OU Students Association, USA, also present a prize, and this is where you have the opportunity, when you've produced your poster, to upload it so that it can be viewed online by anybody who links into the university intranet. And the deadline for uploading the poster is again 5 o'clock on Thursday, May the 14th. That's a little bit in advance of the actual poster competition, which isn't until June the 9th, but we want to give people time to look at all the posters, submit their vote, so that we can actually award, USA can award the prize on the day. So the online voting starts on Monday, May the 18th, which is why it's really important that you submit your posters by the Thursday previously. On the actual day, the posters will be exhibited in the Hub Theatre. We provide coffee from 8:30 AM in the morning, and you will be given a number that for your poster, and we asked you to put your poster on that particular board so that the judges and the students for the peer review can find your poster easily. And posters must be in place by 9:20 AM to try and make sure that we fit the whole day into a reasonable period. We have to be quite tight to time throughout the whole session. We divide the competition entrants into two groups, the red group and the blue group. If you're in the first group to be judged, we ask you to stay with your poster during that session up until the break. And the other group who are not being judged will be doing a peer review, and we will send you all the details for the peer review process. The judges, please, if they could take precedence over the students when they come round to talk to you, that would really help, and it ensures fairness to all the students, so they get the full time with each pair of judges. And then after the break, we swap over, and the group that were doing the peer reviewing will then be meeting the judges, and those who've already met the judges and presented to fellow students will then be doing the peer reviewing themselves. And we'll be sending a draft programme and further details, including the judging criteria for the competition, shortly. So you ask, why present a poster? Why do we really encourage you to enter this competition, whichever level of work study you're at the moment, whether you're doing an MPhil, an MRes or a PhD? And it's because we want you to promote your work and your research. Often through these more casual meetings rather than the formal ones within your own discipline, or if you go to a conference within your discipline, you might get ideas and suggestions that you haven't thought of that might actually encourage you to think of a different way to work. And you can get one of those light bulb moments when you think, gosh, I hadn't thought of actually looking at my research in that way, either in the methodology or in the way that you can relate it to the real world. And past students have found this incredibly valuable. It's also an opportunity for people to criticize your poster and your presentation in the sense of constructive criticism, in that they can help you improve things for the future. And they can also help you practice this engagement with the general public, because today's researchers need to be able to do that. If you think about when experts are interviewed in the media, be it radio or television, or they're quoted in the newspaper, it's all sound bites. It's, describe your research in 3 sentences. Tell me what the key finding is. Tell me why you think this is important research. And this is an opportunity for you to practice those kinds of techniques so that you feel confident to talk to people in this way in the future. It's also an opportunity to possibly develop future collaborations. As I've mentioned, you've got the chance to invite your own personal guests who might be able to help your research along its way. And that's also because we want you to be able to have the opportunity to promote yourself. So this is giving you the chance for networking and to think about, especially if you're in your 3rd year, where your ideas are and what you want to do in the future once you've completed your PhD. It might seem a long way off for those of you who are in your 1st year, but it's amazing how quickly the time goes when you've got a really interesting project to develop and work through. And finally, it's because we want you to have recognition for the fact that you're here as a postgraduate researcher, and we want the wider public across the university to be aware of the richness of the work that's carrying on here. So do we have any questions at this point? If you'd like to raise your hand. No? In that case, we'll move on to the better presentations. So this session of the training workshop is to pass on some of the advice that the judges have given over the last years, not necessarily just last year, to try and help students give the best possible posters that they can and the best presentation. As I've mentioned, the judging is on both criteria. It's about your poster and it's about your presentation. And later on this morning, Liz will be talking more about how you can give a good presentation, and Peter will be talking to you about the actual graphic design. But this session is talking about the actual research and how you convey that within your poster. And so what we have now is a series of posters. So I think initially I'm just going to show you run through the actual posters. So you just get an overall impression. Right, so that's just to give you a sense of the diversity of the posters that are produced for this competition. And so now I'd like to look at a few of them. You'll be able to access these after the session, I believe. But this is just to give you a sense of looking at these posters in more depth. So if we look at this one to start with, I need to give you a few minutes to just read it. I'm not quite sure why that has jumped. I'll move us back to that first poster. So would anybody like to comment on what their first thoughts are of this poster? Do you find it easily accessible? What do you think about the layout? Would anybody like to join in? If you'd like to put your hand up and then we can pass the microphone over to you. Right, so Bezie, would you like to comment? Oh, it's moved to Rian.
It's not a very exciting poster. It's pretty, but it's not very exciting.
In what way? Would you like to say a little more?
There aren't many colours on it. There aren't many pictures. It just seems to be the facts, but I'm not really drawn to look at the picture or the poster at all.
Right. Does anybody else like to comment on that? Castle?
I think it's quite sort of modularized. So even though it seems to describe things in a fairly linear fashion, the kind of overall layout isn't really particularly interesting or cohesive. So isn't a bigger picture there?
I agree. Yeah. I think it's quite difficult to know where to go, isn't it? Do you go down the columns or do you go across, read it from left to right? I don't think that's particularly clear. And Bezie? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Would you like to take the microphone, Behi? In that case, I'll move.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello? Yes, would you like to comment?
I was just saying that considering this involves consumers and talking about maternity, equipment and people, there doesn't seem to be much people in it. It seems very functional and equipment orientated.
Yes, I would agree with that, but that might be the nature of the research. But I agree, it does look as though it's not particularly involving the people, rather it's more focusing on the product. So if we now look at this next one, the 3D virtual view in painting. And when you're ready to comment, if you put your hand up, then we can pass it over to you. Hello, Castle. Or Lawrence.
Shall I? Yeah, okay. Shall I? Yeah, it looks. I don't understand what I'm supposed to be reading from this, so it doesn't seem very clear what exactly the research is about.
I agree. I think that is the biggest drawback to this poster, that it's not clear what they're doing or necessarily why they're doing it. Would you like to carry on, Lawrence? Is there any other point, or I'll pass it?
Yeah, the colours are a bit distracting as well.
it's not easy to see. The text isn't very bold, is it, against the background?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Behi, did you want to come in
yes,
again?
thank you. I think there's an assumption that we all know what virtual view in painting is. So it would have been useful to just have an introduction or explanation of what it is and what they're trying to achieve. Unless you're in that world, I think you'd struggle to know what they're trying to do.
I think that's true, and that is a good point, that we're talking to a general audience, so we cannot assume that people have a good background in the topics that you're working on. Another challenge with this poster, I think, is that if you look at the virtual view synthesis window, that's very small, it's difficult to read, and our advice is that you should be able to read a poster from at least 1 meter distance, because if you are presenting this at a conference, you tend to have a group of people standing around the poster. They're not able to get very close, so you need to make sure not just the text is visible from that distance, but also any of the diagrams, graphs, etc. that you put in. They've done much better with the proposed in-painting model. I think that would be able to be read at a distance, but that little window about the virtual view synthesis, I think would be very challenging. And actually looking at your poster on screen is quite a good way of getting a sense of how it looks overall before you get to printing it out. I'll move on to and what about this one? Thinking of things we haven't already pulled out so far with our perusal. I'm not recommending that you try and read it, so it's just overall impressions. Hi, Cato.
I think that's almost like a sort of abbreviated, just abbreviated summation of all their working so far. It doesn't really seem much like well, I suppose it is a poster, but it's just got so much information, and it's just structured just like maybe put a few slides together from a presentation or something, or?
It looks like it's part of a journal article almost, doesn't it? Or possibly a presentation.
Much, information crammed in there, I think. Really.
And I think this is something you need to avoid. If you overload your poster, people aren't going to. You're not going to attract their attention to come to read it. When people go to a conference, they have a list of all the abstract titles, and they might have all the poster titles, and they might also have an abstract, or they might just at that stage have the titles, and they'll skim through and decide which ones attract their attention and sound interesting. So the first thing you need to do is have a title that draws people in. And I think this one is a lovely title if you're going to a life science conference, but I think the general public might struggle to know what it is that you mean. So they probably wouldn't be that attracted to that title because they think, oh, I'm not sure what that means, so perhaps I'll go and look at something else that I can relate to straight away. And then if you look at this poster, not only is it text heavy and it has graphs that are very difficult to read, the axes, has a lot of jargon, not just in the title. It's not jargon in the sense of for academic discourse, it's the synonyms, the acronyms, the discourse that we use within that area. But actually, for the general public, you've got to try very hard not to use technical language. If some things you will have to explain, and in that case, make sure you give a good explanation as to what the term means, if you cannot avoid it. but as far as you can, try to use things in a more everyday language so that it's accessible to everyone. I think we'll move on from that one. What about this one? I think the thing that's quite nice about this poster is that although it's got quite a lot of text and it looks quite text heavy, they've actually, apart from that search personalization, which is very difficult to read, they've tried to structure it so that you know what they're trying to do and how they're doing it, but I think it's still not very accessible to the general public. So I'd like to show you some that I think might work more if you're trying to reach the general public. So what do people think of this one? This is one of our winners from last year. Hello, Betty.
And my first comment is it grabs your attention straight away. It's the title is good, and then makes you want to know more.
And do you like the fact it's done as though it's a newspaper?
Yes, it's different, and I think it appears like a newspaper article, although we do say, and the photographs seem to be in place and explaining. So yes, I do like that. But I'm not sure I would read it all.
And that's one of the challenges, because I think it's a nice format and it does catch your eye, but there is a danger that it's still a bit overloaded. And one of the students in the training session last week was saying that the problem with having the boxes at the side with the possible experimental outcomes and the melanoma fast facts, he found he was sort of drifting between the body of the text and then going off to read the little boxes, and then lost his place in the story that was being told in the main theme. So I think, although in a lot of ways this works really well, you need to think about the person who's going to be reading it as well. And maybe you don't need to put as much information. You can still convey you're doing it as a newspaper without perhaps having quite so many additional boxes and things. But overall, people really, the feedback around this was very good, because people could understand it, because actually what he's looking at is quite scientific, but he's managed to explain it in a way that reached a wide audience, which was really, really lovely. Everybody was very, very pleased to read that. Let me just... And this is Delphines. What do you... How does this grab people? We've got some people who are very confident to talk. If you're not happy to talk, I'm glad to see that some people are also joining in the chat room. Are you all able to see that? I can't see. Alid, are you hoping to ask to speak? No? Okay. I'll move on to another poster if nobody has any comments on that one. I think again the layout is nice and it's signposted well. They've put arrows around so you know exactly how they want you to follow their eye and follow their thinking. But again, I think you might challenge sometimes with the content. A few of the images are quite challenging and some of them are difficult to read from a distance. But overall, this is an engaging poster, and I think it would catch people's eye and they would want to go and look at it in more depth. I think this has quite a lot of points of the others, in that they've got an interesting way of putting it together, putting some of the text into the hexagons, but whether again some of that information is very tiny, and those graphs here are virtually impossible to see. Castle?
I suppose I just feel I like the sort of simple and quite straightforward design, but I feel that it's dealing with something like climate change. There's a lot of sort of quite iconic images you can have around that, and I don't know if they've used that to the fullest. They could have had a lot more sort of eye-catching images, just because climate change is very sort of it creates certain images in people's minds. Perhaps it's not relevant to this particular. But in some ways, I think there was an opportunity maybe to put maybe slightly more interesting images in there. Whereas I don't find it particularly visually catches my eye, this poster, really.
No, and that's important because when people read a journal article, they can read it and go away and then come back and read it again. They can download it if they're reading it online. It's a more permanent piece of work. With a poster, not only do you need to attract people by the title, but as they go into a poster session, you want them to look across at your poster and be drawn towards it. So it is really important to have it, as well as having the research there, to have it visually appealing. But again, I think they've done well in, they haven't overloaded it with text, and they've made it quite clear what they're doing. And just like that, I don't want to stop on that one, just how they have with the one that about the volatile biomarkers, they've explained how their research fits with the real world, and that's another very important consideration when you're talking to the general public, because they're very interested to know who's going to benefit from the work that you're doing. So you need to be thinking about the real world context of your work, in addition to what might be quite an academically driven piece of work. But everything can be related to the real world. Even really blue skies research. If you think about it and talk to your supervisor, they'll help you put it into that broader context. Because, as I say, 21st century researchers need to be able to engage with the general public, engage with the media, and show why it's important that this work's being done, and why it's being funded, why you were successful to have funding to pursue this particular strand of research. Would anybody like to comment on this particular poster? I think it's Castle
sorry,
again.
I think I just left my hand there. Sorry about that. Right.
Oh. I think this poster lays out a nice research story. They've used very traditional headings: introduction, aims, objective, methods, and early outcomes. This was when they hadn't really any particular findings at that point. But you don't have to use those headings. you can use other headings that you might think are more appropriate. And if the posters we've just looked at previously haven't told the story in that way by using those headings, but they've still conveyed those messages. They've still introduced their work. They've still told you what the aim of it is. They've given you a little bit about the methodology, but again, not going into too much depth, because you haven't got the space within a poster to go into too much depth. And then they've given an indication of the outcomes.
Yeah, this might be a sort of minor, it is quite a minor point, but I suppose I find, you know, the kind of layout's quite precise, but they haven't justified the text, which kind of is makes it a bit sort of straggly. So sometimes they got this kind of precise layout, and then kind of the text a bit straggly, which I don't particularly like, but it's just a minor point.
Okay. But it's nice that you're engaging, so I'm pleased that people, you know, if anybody else would like to speak, please do. If you're not sure how to do that, send a message in the chat, and then one of my colleagues will be able to tell you how to do that. It's a bit tricky to be trying to do that as well as facilitating the session at the same time. I think we've covered most of the points on this one, in that again it's quite clearly set out, but I think the diagram in the middle is really inaccessible. I don't know what the rest of you feel, but I think that's quite challenging to know what's going on there. And maybe you have to, if that was an important part of your message, you need to think about how you convey it. And one of the things we suggest is that when you're putting your project together, your poster together, you talk to somebody, and there's a little activity at the end of this that you'll be able to try out with your friends or colleagues or other students, in that you can then practice what it is that you're wanting to say to make sure that it's coming over well and is clear. And then when you start putting your poster together, show it to people and ask them if they can follow it, if it's all as clear as it can be. Do your diagrams convey the right messages? Do they link in with the text well? Have you managed to avoid using technical language? And I think if you do that, if you do a peer review before you get to actually as far as printing out your poster, you'll find that you're getting a lot of really valuable feedback. Hi, Olivia, what would you like to say?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to kind of point out that the poster that you've used as an example of the one that kind of had the best feedback generally was about a technical subject, but you know, the way that it was written accessibly had something to do clearly with the creator's perspective of, okay, I'm going to do this like a newspaper article, which would be aimed at a general audience, especially if it was The Guardian. But it seems like people who have really technical subjects, of which I'm actually not one, but would have quite a disadvantage in trying to communicate this. So a lot of the critiques have been these diagrams are really difficult, but I think it's really hard for people who have really technical subjects to make that accessible in a way that makes sense to them and doesn't completely degrade their research, but at the same time communicates it in a way that other people can understand it. So I don't know if you could say something about that. You were talking about doing peer review, but I think visually too it must be difficult because there are a lot of concepts that you can't explain everything, you know, to the layman audience.
Well, I think that's why it's really important, and what we're trying to convey in this session is that you need to select the part of your, you need to be selective in the topic that you're going to choose. You can't actually convey the whole of a PhD thesis in one poster. So you've got to think about what it is that you want to convey. And then you need to think about how to convey it in the most accessible sense. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen Professor Monica Grady from Earth Sciences talk about all the recent developments in astronomy. in particular landing that probe on a comet, which happened a couple of months ago now, she's able to convey really complex things about the stars in a very accessible way. And so we're trying to help students who've got a more technical subject to manage to hone it in a way that can be understandable. And what a lot of science students are told is that you should be able, when they start a PhD, you should be able to explain your research to your mum or your grandmother or to the guy who lives next door, who are all intelligent people, but who don't necessarily have in-depth knowledge of your particular topic. And so we would need people to learn how to do this. And I agree it's challenging, but it is important that people follow this through. Does that help?
Should I just pipe in? Yeah, no, I think that's useful.
Yeah, no,
like I said, I'm not actually somebody who's necessarily going to have that problem, because my topic's pretty, I think, generally accessible in some ways. It doesn't have a lot of jargon attached to it, but yeah, I just was thinking about that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's fine, because it is more challenging, which is why we're covering some of these topics to try and help students not fall into those traps, because it is complicated. And I think the last one I wanted to look at was this one, which actually this was the winner of the peer review, and the students, because half of it's on the poster and half of it is on your presentation, students found this quite accessible, although it doesn't look that accessible perhaps on first glance. When the student talked them through, they found it really interesting, and it scored the most highly. So I think that shows that you can convey a complex scientific principle fairly readily if you think, if you think about it carefully to start with, and you practice with people who are, if you're in one of the sciences, practice with somebody who isn't a scientist. And it's really important for those of you who are from science, that if you're doing a project that's part of a much bigger project, you make it clear that what your part is, because you will have a small part of that very big project, and make sure that you're explaining what it is your contribution is going to be, and not just talking about the whole of the project in great depth. And so, just to make sure we've covered everything in our conversation, we've talked about it needing to target a general audience, that your poster needs to have your title, the name, and the OU logo. We've talked about making sure you can tell a story without trying to cram everything that you're doing for your PhD into one poster. Talked about how you need to present it logically, but you don't need to use those major headings. You need to give the academic argument for your research about why you're doing it and who will benefit from the research. Talked about the only including your relevant material, and it's really important that your poster ends with a clear take-home message, which most probably will be how it will benefit people, how it relates to the real world. Talked about not using terminology unless you have to, and if you do, make sure you explain it well. Getting a friend to read your poster and to help proofread it. And the point is to actually make an impact with your poster, and it's important not to assume the audience are familiar with your project or field, but equally don't give so little information, like that second poster we looked at, that the point of the research is lost. So it's a balance between not overloading and having sufficient information that people know why you're doing the research. I'm not going to go through presenting your poster particularly because that's going to be covered in a later session, but just to remind you that it is about introducing your work and using your poster to illustrate the key points of your presentation, making sure the audience are following your reasoning. And what's really valuable, the key point of this slide, is to give yourself time to prepare for questions and to think about rehearsing answers to possible questions that could be posed by people either familiar or unfamiliar with your field. And finally, you'll be able to have this presentation and try out this activity, because I think you might find that it's helpful when you're at the preparing stage for putting your project together. So do you have any comments, any questions that you would like to ask?
Yeah,
Hello, Lawrence?
what if there's no obvious benefit to your research?
Sorry?
What happens if there's no obvious benefit to your research?
Well, I think that there is always a benefit if you think, I mean, it might be that, I don't know, say you're researching something, historical documents. It could be that you're shedding light on something that happened in the past. It could be that you're thinking about it might resonate with something that's happening today. It might be something that you could bring some lessons from the past to make us handle things better in the future. So I think everything's got a link. You just have to think about it.
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't think anybody is doing pointless research because it wouldn't have been funded. Whether you've proposed it yourself or your supervisors bid for funding to be able to award you a studentship, it all goes through a peer review and academic process. So all of you are doing really competent, valued research. It's just you might not yet have thought about it in that way because you're very grounded in your discipline. Does that answer your question, Lawrence?
I just want to see what you thought really about that. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, that's fine. Well, if nobody has any other questions,